There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. Grief is a weird human experience to have, and the ways that we cope with it, while often perceived as weird, are actually kind of smart backdoor ways to helping ourselves find a sense of stability or normalcy or consistency in a world that loss has turned upside down. Hi there, grief growers, and welcome back to Grief Grower. I am so delighted and jazzed to be with you here today, as always. If you have been growing alongside me in my work for a while, welcome back. If you are new to me in my work and found me through the title of this podcast or the title of this YouTube video, wherever you're finding me, hello. My name is Shelby Forsythia. I am a grief coach, a two-time author, and the founder of Life After Loss Academy. And I have had the honor of helping thousands of grieving people stop feeling lost and stuck in the midst of grief and start building lives that they love from the lives that loss forced them to live. This includes not only death losses, of course, but also losses like divorce and breakup, major diagnosis, and any other loss that drastically changes your life. Here on the show, we believe that grief is not something to get over, as society often tells us to do. It is something to grow with and alongside for the rest of our lives. And today on the show, we're going to be talking about the weird ass ways that grief shows up. The weird coping strategies that a lot of us have that none of us are talking about that actually freaking work. Because there is definitely a societal script for respectable grief or how grief should go. And it goes a lot like this. It's like cry a little, journal some, maybe meditate, get back to normal around the 1 year mark. And then if everything is operating as it should, you won't be grieving anymore. People who are listening, I know you can't see me on YouTube, but I'm using very heavy air quotes on this one. But there is a way that grief actually shows up for us in the world. And sometimes it's it's really weird. And despite what movies and TV shows and music and social media portray to us, grief doesn't always look like controlled tears in a private therapist's office, and meditation at a retreat center and journaling about your feelings until something cathartic happens. And as we all know on this show, grief does not end after just 1 year. Sometimes grief looks like cutting all your hair off, having conversations, yes, out loud, in your house with inanimate objects, engaging obsessively in a I'm gonna eat cereal for every meal phase, and it can also manifest as 3 a.m. video game marathons and seasons where all you want to do is get another tattoo or get another piercing, or maybe a whole month where the only thing that you wear is this same consistent uniform of a hoodie and jeans at home, at work, and out running errands. You just do not care. That is the only outfit you can see. These are all bizarre things that happen in grief, and they're often made up of like little rituals or little choices that we make that usually no one else notices, but for whatever reason, we need them or we keep doing them because they help us keep going. And are they weird? Yeah, sure, absolutely. But it doesn't necessarily mean that they're wrong or that they're signals that we're coping with grief incorrectly. So this episode today is for all of my weirdos out there. Or if you don't identify as a weirdo, for all the people who think that this thing in my grief is kind of an odd manifestation of it, is it normal to insert thing here? This is for you. I'm going to cover 5 things that are often perceived as weird in the aftermath of grief that are actually really normal, and also more than that, they actually work, whether they're backed by science or they're backed by the stories of grieving people who say, "Hey, this is something I've done and it actually really works for me." So let's start with number 1. This is playing Tetris or other video games to cope with grief. This gives you a sense of order in a disordered world, cognitive relief, oftentimes from making decisions or have to think very hard about things, and emotional regulation at a time when it can feel like your emotions are like, woo, all over the place. If you have ever played Tetris or another game where your task is to sort things or finish a puzzle or do some sort of strategy, if you've done this on repeat after a loss, You are not alone. And actually, you might be onto something in choosing to play games after significant loss event. There was a study that was published in PLOS One, which found that playing Tetris shortly after seeing something traumatic reduced the buildup of intrusive visual memories. And the researchers in this study believe that the game's visual spatial demand on the brain interfered, in a good way, with traumatic memory consolidation. So, said in very simpler terms, because all of us are out here with grief brain, games similar to Tetris give your brain something to do besides relive trauma. Now, I will offer a huge asterisk here that this was a very small study with a sample size of just 40 people, but this is a really cool finding. And this weird grief response that can be perceived as weird either by yourself or by other people can actually make a lot of sense, because when our brains are spiraling or overwhelmed, participating in an activity that has clear rules, we're in control, we're in the driver's seat, literally or metaphorically, race car games, anybody, and goals. I know what I'm aiming for and I know what it takes to achieve it, can be really, really helpful. And games that offer other soothing patterns or puzzles or interactions, things like Stardew Valley or Candy Crush, that's one of my personal favorites, or Animal Crossing, these things can help reduce our sense of being emotionally overloaded. It can provide predictable rewards when life feels like chaos. It can help us feel like, oh my God, I've accomplished something, even if that accomplishment is happening in a digital world, or like I've completed a task. And sometimes that's a success when you're grieving, and offering a sense of escapism, but one that actually helps you come back to yourself in a way. So many people, when they're grieving, report feeling more capable or more in control, or like they have a sense of power when they're playing games or when they're engaging in activities where it's sort of like a time limited or a goal limited quest, and then finishing that thing in a season of grief where everything's kind of weird and ambiguous and it seems like nothing's ever really done, can be such a relief for people who are caught up in the midst of grief. I will say, if video games are not your thing, which is a-okay, anything else that is a non-violent pattern-based game with clear rules and goals, this could be something like analog crossword puzzle with pen and paper, doing the daily Wordle from the New York Times, Sudoku, a number-based game could be helpful, card games, board games, anything that has sort of this structure or setup and there's a start and an end and a clear goal, and in some ways you are in control, can be really, really great ways to cope with grief. And as a bonus, I will say, some of these games, many of these games, can be played with other people, whether you're texting people in a group chat your Wordle results for the day, or you're actually going to like a board game cafe or a neighbor's house or something like that and playing an interactive card game with people. And playing games in the aftermath of loss can help you strengthen connections in a season where it's really easy to feel isolated and alone. And it's kind of one of those things to do where you're like, we're playing this thing together and we're not directly talking about grief, but the thing that is happening is helping with the fact that you're grieving. This is a quote that I pulled from a Reddit thread about video games after a loss. Somebody said, I played so much Mario Kart after my dad died. I'd spend a lot of time with family the first week, but when I was home, it was video games. I think the easiest way to shut your mind off and distract yourself. TV can be randomly triggering because you really never know what you're going to see, especially in a world where crime dramas are really possible to see on TV. And you don't necessarily want to leave the house, and sleep comes with nightmares, but driving around in circles collecting coins in Mario Kart is the perfect balance of distraction to pass the time. And this is from a user on Reddit named Aaron MKC. And that was on a discussion on the Reddit thread for grief support. And I'm not saying Reddit is kind of the end all be all for where grievers are telling their stories, but in terms of, do video games help with grief, or do you find yourself playing games as a way to cope with grief? It was a really neat deep dive to take on the internet, because I know I'm not the only person who has leaned on logic or gameplay. They are small ways in which we can reassure our brains that there are ways in which the world can be put in order again, even if it's not fixing our loss, even if we're not getting any sort of tangible result there. And there are pockets of the world where things are orderly or predictable, or in the case of like more emotional relationship games, places that are kind or generous or have coins or gifts or interactions to give. Number two, weird things that can actually be very helpful in grief is talking to inanimate objects. And this is another one I've done myself. And what this offers you is ongoing connection, potentially, if the person you're grieving or the thing you're grieving is a person who died, and a sense of emotional release. And this could be done You could whisper to a photo or talk to a photo in your wallet. You could say goodnight to a loved one's favorite stuffed animal. I know a lot of people who have lost children do something like that. You might pray to a figurine or a statue. You might place your hand on a certain tree or a stone in your garden because it just feels like it carries the soul of a person that you love. And to outsiders, this behavior might look really strange. That person is talking to themselves, or that person's talking to a picture on a wall. But grief experts say that doing things like this is one manifestation of something called continuing bonds theory. And continuing bonds are ways that we keep in touch with people we love who have died rather than letting go. And I'm using air quotes again, letting go, but which is kind of what society wants us to do, is let it go, forget about it, leave it in the past, get over it, blah blah blah. But here on Grief Grower, we're like, no, we're holding on to it. If anything else, we're doubling down. And doubling down in grief looks a lot like setting up places and spaces in our homes, in our gardens, in our workspaces, out with friends. Maybe it's something even we wear on our bodies to talk to and interact with, to feel as if we are still connected to people we love who are no longer here. There is a grief scholar by the name of Thomas Addig, and he has a book called How We Grieve, where he writes the continuing bond is not morbid or pathological. In other words, it's not a sign something's wrong with you. It is a living connection that grievers nurture in their own way. And talking to inanimate objects, which is also known as anthropomorphizing, is a way to cope with loss and maintain a connection. So this can involve reporting back on memories, expressing feelings that maybe you didn't or couldn't express in life, or maybe just like seeking comfort from this object. It's comforting to have it around. It's comforting to talk to it. I have coffee mugs from my best friend who died. I have jewelry from my mother and pictures of hers, and sometimes I'll talk to her face. Like, there are things that exist in my home that allow me to still feel surrounded by her. And yes, I do still talk to them. I also once worked with a client whose son died, and every morning she had this little 10-minute ritual where she would hold a necklace that had his thumbprint stamped into it, and she would speak to him as if he could still hear her. She said she felt more connected to him during the rest of her day just by doing this ritual first thing in the morning, and also felt like he was still updated and a part of all the goings on of her life. And it wasn't a big ritual, and it wasn't something that was publicized, and it wasn't this big memorial that she had to invite 300 people to. It was her relationship with him made manifest, and then something that allowed it to continue on throughout the day. These 10 minutes she spent with this necklace, with this inanimate object, talking to it, allowed her to feel more connected to him throughout the rest of the day, and then, of course, over time, throughout the rest of her life. Let's move on here to number 3, which is drastically changing your appearance. This is something that so many grieving people do in grief. This often gives you a sense of control, and something I really like about it, a symbolic sort of outward mirror for inner change. Sometimes changing your appearance in some way can help you signify to yourself and to other people that I have been through something. I have been impacted greatly by something, and now I carry it with me. I wear it on my face. I wear it on my body. Grief can drastically impact our identities, and oftentimes we wake up in the morning, and I hear this from so many grieving clients I work with, I don't recognize myself anymore, or I don't know who I am anymore, or I look the same in the mirror, but I feel absolutely different and untethered from myself inside. And so a lot of people, after a devastating loss, they'll dye their hair, they'll cut it all off, they'll get a buzz cut, they might get colorful wigs, they get piercings or tattoos, they overhaul their wardrobe. It is a way to signify, I have been through something. Something has happened to me. I feel it on the inside, and now I'm wearing it on the outside. There's an author by the name of Elizabeth DeVita Rayburn who wrote a book called The Empty Room, who lost a sibling, and she got a tattoo to signify and symbolize the loss of her sibling. And she has this very simple quote in the book that just says, I needed the pain, the mark, the reminder that I survived. I needed all 3 of those things all at once. And sometimes, especially for tattoos and piercings, there can be a sense of I am controlling the pain that happens to me. I'm opting into a painful experience, as opposed to with loss, we often feel like it's forced upon us against our will. We don't opt into experiences of loss oftentimes. And then, especially with tattoos and piercings, we get to keep the mark. The scar or the jewelry or the ink is visible. And now there is a reminder that you have survived something. So in a world, in a society that often tells us as grieving people to go back to normal or revert back to the person you used to be. Outward aesthetic shifts, even if they seem trivial. A lot of people are like, she's gonna cut her hair after the breakup, which is one of my like favorite tropes. I'm like, yeah, cut your hair after the breakup. Hair holds memories. Do it. Absolutely. It is a way to say, I am not going back. I am a different person. There is only going forward, but that going forward is going to include the person I am now and the person that I used to be. And it's just one of these ways that we can really signify to ourselves and to others that something really big has changed. I will say, in like westernized Eurocentric society, we don't have a lot of overarching cultural recognition uniform practices for these. So grievers often create their own. Just really quickly down the line, hair changes. You could shave your head to reflect inner upheaval or symbolic rebirth. Maybe I'm taking a fresh start, so I'm shaving all my hair off. Dyeing your hair black or white or another sort of bright or artificial color. You might cut your hair drastically as a mark of before and after. I was this when I walked in, I was this when I came out. It's a very um, liberating and cathartic experience to get a haircut after a major loss. For clothing choices, a lot of people will choose to wear all black by personal choice, like continue wearing black for longer than the memorial or continue to wear another color for longer than the memorial. It's traditional to wear black at funerals in most Eurocentric countries and areas, but oftentimes people will extend that like way far beyond the memorial. You might buy new clothes because the old clothes feel tainted by the before, by the loss. You might choose clothes that are soft or oversized or like armor-like don't talk to me, for a sense of sensory safety or social safety. Like just send the message, don't talk to me, or send the message of like, I am protected from something, or I'm guarding myself against something with my grief. Or in the case of me and so many other grieving people I know, you might choose to consistently wear a loved one's personal clothing, shoes, accessories, or jewelry if you have access to them. I know a lot of people, especially in the early months and years following a loss, will wear items that belong to a person they love who died as a way of kind of wearing them forward into the world, carrying them forward into the world with them. They are not being left back there. They are actually going out into your day to day with you, so they are not left behind. For tattoos and piercings, a lot of people these days get memorial tattoos, including names or dates or handwriting of somebody they love. And there are some tattoo studios now that can mix in a loved one's ashes, if you had them cremated, into the tattoo ink. And so you're literally carrying pieces of them with you. A lot of people will get things like new piercings, either, as I mentioned before, a form of controlled pain or a way of reclaiming their body from something that happened to them. Or they may include tattoos or piercings that have symbols related to the person who died, things like stars or butterflies or hummingbirds or initials or plants or flowers that they found really significant or special. There's a really cool article from The Offing, which is called My Hair is an Archive of My Grief, and there's a quote by the writer Jodi M. Savage. She says, "My hair is an archive of my grief, a collection of who and what I have loved and lost, a reminder of what I have survived." She is a Black woman talking about having cancer and caring for her grandmother as her grandmother was dying and remembering how her grandmother tended to her hair. It's a really cool article and definitely one worth reading. And I resonate with this idea of my hair as an archive of my grief myself. Just a couple of years ago, I cut my hair from mid-back length, like pretty long. I was trying to grow it as long as possible, to a very short bob, like just sweeping shoulders, as the second anniversary of my best friend's death was approaching. She died in the spring, and it was also like March, Aprilish. It was like spring equinox time. So here in the Northern Hemisphere, that's like fresh start time when all the flowers are popping up. And I posted about it on Instagram and talked about what it is or feels like to get a grief haircut or a haircut in memory of grief. And I got a whole bunch of comments from people who talked about, I cut my hair after my mother died, I buzzed my hair after my child died. There's a lot of different people who resonate with this idea of grief happened, and then I needed to make a visual change on my body that was experiencing this loss. Okay, number 4 is wearing a grief uniform. This is such a cool, weird thing that can give you relief from having to make a lot of decisions after a loss. But kind of like we talked about with changing clothing and changing your physical appearance, it can also give you a sense of comfort and emotional safety, because the clothes we wear are often tied to how comfortable we feel in the world. And I will say that like people who are grieving struggle to make basic choices. That is why a lot of people who are grieving will wear the same outfit or type of outfit, sort of a uniform for weeks or months after a loss. And to be extraordinarily clear, this is not laziness. I have a firm belief that no grieving person is lazy. Grievers are trying very hard to be alive at all times and just exist in a world where their losses have happened. So this is not laziness. Needing to wear a uniform or sticking to only a handful of clothing or outfits is not, I'm lazy and I don't want to make decisions. It is literally decision fatigue, which is a real neurological side effect of loss, aka grief brain, where making choices feels difficult or exhausting because you are in a season where it feels like everything is changing. And this sense of decision fatigue and grief is really well explained by a therapist named Megan Devine in a 2022 Instagram post. And in her Instagram post, she said, even something as simple as deciding what to make for dinner can feel overwhelming. Grief itself is full of changes, major and minor, so you're already starting at a low mental elasticity and capacity. Grievers aren't necessarily starting from zero when they wake up. Oftentimes, they're starting from negative in terms of making decisions. They made so many decisions the day before, or they're in a season where so much is changing all the time that it feels like everything is a decision, that it can feel like I'm not just starting at zero, I'm starting in the negatives. So the less decisions I have to make every day, the better. So when your brain, your mind, your body is in survival mode, things that felt small before, like picking out what the heck shirt you're going to wear today, can feel literally impossible. Like that is an impossible thing to do, especially when so many people around grieving people are saying, let me know if you need anything. Let me know how I can help. If there's anything I can do, let me know. Landing on what that thing is, one of the hardest things to do as a griever, much less do you want to wear the white shirt, the blue shirt, or the yellow shirt today? I don't know. Stop asking me questions. Is such a real experience in grief. So stop giving me options, stop giving me choices. The decision of one thing or a handful of things can make life so much easier when you're grieving, even if the people around you think it's weird. I know for me personally, I wore the same brand of jumpsuit. It was like a one-piece bodysuit situation for months after my best friend died from COVID in 2022. I had three colors and I rotated between them, and I would go to work, I would run errands, I would travel, and I would hang out with friends all in the same outfit. I called it my grief fit, which is a combination of the word grief and outfit. So it's like my grief fit outfit. And I still pull this out. These jumpsuits come out when my life is getting really stressful or really griefy because I know without a shadow of a doubt they fit, they're comfy, I'm gonna look good. I can add a jacket or take it off if it gets too hot. I can wear it with any pair of shoes that I have in my closet, and I look like I've got my shit together, for lack of better phrasing. And now I've got, I don't know, probably like 7 different colors of these jumpsuits because they have been such an aid to me in seasons when life is really overwhelming or really stressful. I want to get to number 5 though too, because this kind of ties into picking out a grief uniform, and that is fixating on a grief meal or choosing a grief meal. And what this will grant you when you're grieving, if you're not doing this already, is familiarity, ritual, simplicity, and sensory grounding. You're like, I've got it. I am rooted into some sort of pattern and routine. Because grief has the ability to magically take your appetite away from you or narrow it down to just a handful of things that sound good. And for me, again, after my best friend's death, I'm drawing a lot on that experience in this episode because it's kind of the more recent loss for me as opposed to my mother who died more than 10 years ago. My best friend died in 2022. After she died, I was wearing my jumpsuit, my grief uniform, and I was also eating toasted bread with mayo, dill, and scrambled eggs. And I ate this breakfast, lunch, dinner for weeks, if not months, after she died. And it's not because I loved it, although I do love it. It is an open faced sandwich with egg and mayo and dill is amazing. But I also loved it because it was easy and it was predictable. I'm like, I'm getting some protein, I'm getting some carbs and some nourishment in here. I'm eating something that's going to satiate me for a while, and I know I can make it again. I will have the energy to make this again. It's not a hard thing. I'm not standing over the stove for hours and hours. I'm not having to chop a bunch of stuff, which is like my least favorite kitchen chore ever. It was easy, it was predictable, and the ingredients were really easy to find. And a lot of people I work with report this same sort of desire for simple, predictable food. I worked with a client once who expressed a sense of shame for ordering so much DoorDash after her dad died, and we actually reframed it as her taking care of her grieving body in a way that was fast, that was low effort, and that was hella effective. And her season of DoorDash grief meals did not last forever, but in this immediate aftermath of her father's death, it was a relief to have food she knew she liked just poof show up on her front porch. Side note, if you're looking to support somebody who's grieving, oftentimes sending money for food, whether it's groceries or meal delivery, is one of the best things you can give them because they can pick what they want and it's good forever. You can order food forever. You can order delivery of groceries to your porch or meals to your porch forever. And it's not like a casserole that's going to go bad eventually, or you don't know what their allergies are, or you don't know if they're vegan or gluten-free or whatever the case may be. It is something that is so incredibly easy to gift to a griever, but so, so appreciated because in a world, a land of decision fatigue where lots of change is happening, being able to say, I consistently like the chicken sandwich from this restaurant and I can get 10 chicken sandwiches for the next 2 weeks because of this person's gift card. Oh my goodness, what a blessing. I will say that grievers who are finding themselves repeating one simple meal or a rotating selection of like minimal foods, this is not about disordered eating. This is not about having an eating disorder. It is about self-soothing at a time when it feels like life is out of order. So this is not generally about grieving people wanting to control their weight or how they look. It is oftentimes a decision that's made for the sake of narrowing down the decisions that need to be made. It's for the sake of simplicity and predictability and consistency in a world where loss has turned all of those things upside down. I will say, and this is a topic for a totally other episode, grief can be activating of eating disorders if you have one already. So if that's something that you're struggling with, please look up eating disorder therapists or mental health practitioners in your area who aren't just trained in eating disorders, but are trauma informed or grief informed as well, because the blend of those things, oh my gosh, is so incredibly powerful. And we'll definitely touch on that in a future episode. That'd be a good one. One of my favorite quotes, and this is a book I actually have a copy of, it's called Extra Helping by Janet Rich Elsbach. It's a cookbook for all sorts of seasons of life transition. So things like somebody is injured, somebody has a new baby, somebody's going through cancer, somebody has had a loss in the family. It's a cookbook of different types of meals to bring for those specific things. My favorite section in the book is meals to bring people who have just moved house. And it's so smart because who would think of this? I would not think of this until I read her words of people who've just moved house probably don't know where their silverware is yet because they haven't unpacked it. And so the whole section of things to bring to people who have just moved house is all no silverware required. It is hand food. And that is such a blessing to people who may not know where the plates and the forks are because they literally have just moved house. But in this book, it's called Extra Helping, once again by Janet Rich Elsbach. She writes, everyone has to eat. The things we survive have one common thread. If we got through it, we must have eaten something. And so grievers know it's kind of annoying that you have to keep eating, that you have to keep feeding yourself in addition to figuring out how to navigate life after loss. And one great way to do that is to reduce decision fatigue. You get to pick a grief meal that you love and can consistently eat over and over again. A lot of neurodivergent people would call this a hyperfixation meal. Or you can make a list of foods that you know that you enjoy, maybe things that are pre-packaged or things that are pre-chopped or cut and ready for you to eat at a moment's notice, and just like keep that rotating cast of characters, 10 foods, 20 foods on a rotating basis in your refrigerator or on your counter so that you can keep feeding yourself as you grieve. I will say this one thing also about fixating on a grief meal. In addition to reducing decision fatigue, smell and taste, which are activated when we're eating, are directly tied to memory. And so a consistent and predictable grief meal that you choose for yourself can also, if you want to go the extra mile, become a ritual of remembrance when you're grieving, sort of a sensory way to say, I'm still here. I'm still connected to a person who died. I'm still nourishing myself, especially if your food is connected to a positive memory of a loved one. I'm thinking things like mac and cheese. I'm thinking things like casseroles. I'm thinking things like childhood foods or desserts that somebody made for you. If you need to eat that for the next 2-3 months, you go right ahead. Like, I'm not going to come in here and food police you when you're grieving. That's the last thing that anybody should be doing in the aftermath of devastating loss. But if your grief foods are kind of, again, go the extra mile, tied to positive memories of someone you love who died, it can feel twice as nourishing to eat because the food is nourishing not just your body, which is the thing that needs the fuel to keep going, but also your soul. You may continue to feel tended to by somebody you love who died simply by eating foods they love. And I get chills thinking about that. That's something that really lands with me. I want to say, as we're wrapping up here, that just grief does not have to make sense to be valid. It can be weird and still be valid. If you are playing video games on an infinite loop, if you're like playing Candy Crush on your phone, if you are walking around your house alone and talking to photos or plants or stuffed animals or other inanimate objects, if you find yourself living in the same pair of sweatpants, your own little grief uniform, if you have this raging desire to chop off all your hair, or you've done it already, if you find yourself eating the same three things over and over and over again, there's nothing wrong with you. You are not broken. You are a grieving person. And I gotta say this too, your weirdness is a kind of wisdom in the aftermath of loss. The things that you keep leaning on for support and help are your unique ways of coping with challenges and changes and upheavals and secondary losses and all the stuff that's coming with life with grief. And as long as you're not hurting yourself or hurting other people and fulfilling the obligations you have to care for yourself and others, it's more than okay for your grief to present as a little bit screwball, a little bit odd. Grief is weird. Grief, there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. Grief is a weird human experience to have, and the ways that we cope with it, while often perceived as weird, are actually kind of smart backdoor ways to helping ourselves find a sense of stability or normalcy or consistency in a world that loss has turned upside down. I will say, if you want to get support from people who truly understand the weirdness of grief, you are always welcome to join us in Life After Loss Academy. It is not a place where we only talk about moving forward. We talk about building a life that includes your grief, honors the behaviors and rituals that other people might perceive as weird, and help you build sort of your own path for navigating life after loss in a way that feels true for you. I've talked about it on previous episodes of the podcast as well as on my website, but we use something that I call the 5-step grief method. We get grounded even when the world is spinning. We release old identities, hopes, and dreams that loss forced away from you or took away from you. We integrate loss into the life that you're still living, and a lot of those things include kind of the behaviors and rituals we talked about today. We establish boundaries with people who've shown that they cannot be supportive of your grief, and we help you foster a relationship with grief that feels friendlier than battling grief or getting over grief or leaving it behind. So if this episode today felt like it really resonated with you, or you were inspired to let your inner weirdo grief flag fly, I hope you'll join us in Life After Loss Academy. It is really a place where every single conversation about grief is welcome and honored. And we love talking about the lesser spoken about elements of grief and the ways they continue to show up for us months, years, even decades later. Grief makes us all a little weird. And it is a place where grief and weirdness can go together. That's all for this episode of Grief Grower. Thank you so much for joining me today. If you're looking for grief support beyond this show, you can find free workshops, blog articles, and my signature What's Your Grief Support Style quiz at shelbyforsythia.com/links. If this podcast felt validating to your weirdness or otherwise helpful to you, please subscribe and leave a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And be sure to share Grief Grower with a friend because you never really know what someone you love is going through. A huge thank you to the Grief Growers community for supporting the show on Patreon. If you'd like to join them and help me keep the show free from ads for mattresses and meal delivery kits because grief is tough enough without commercials, head to patreon.com/shelbyforsythia. As a Patreon supporter, you get to help me choose new topics and guests for the show, and you're the first to get behind-the-scenes access to all of my upcoming projects. Grief Growers hosted by me, Shelby Forsythia, with theme music by Addie Goldstein. Until next time, I see you. I am so proud of you and the work that you're doing in the world. And I love you. Because even through grief, we are growing.